Yes, hello everyone. We are starting up again. Bare kom nærmere. Vi starter op igen. Og jeg vil gøre det i engelsk, fordi vi har besøg af Jonathan Flory. So my name is Jeppe Ostersen, and I'm a member of the board in the Danish Implementation Network. I'm going to present Jonathan Flory. He's the last speaker. He's going to talk about how social investment can help transform public sector commissioning. And that's through an approach called partnering for outcomes. By highlighting this topic, we in the planning group wanted to dig deeper into the financial incentives. How can we use financing as an implementation instrument? We were curious about how can this financing tool be applied so it will help create outcomes for kids, families, and unemployed people. So we looked around and we found the Center of Social Finance Limited, where you are director, and they work through an approach called partnering, and we thought that was quite interesting in the topics we have been around today. That could be another perspective on how to work with financial incentives in regard to implementation. The center works across different areas, including criminal justice, welfare, youth, and homelessness, and uses this approach, also known as payment for results. That's a part of what you're going to talk about. So, very welcome, and please help me welcome you.
Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Jeppe, for that kind and generous introduction. So, it's a very great pleasure for me to be here with you, and my particular thanks to the board of the Danish Implementation Network for the opportunity to be with you here today. The title of this presentation is Partnering for Outcomes, and the focus really is the use of interventions which have some measure of track record or evidence base to seek to address some difficult social issues. And in particular, I would like to comment on the use of what we call social investment, which is, I like to think of flexible finance, to play its part in expanding these type of social impact programs. So a brief word about my organisation. Social Finance is a not-for-profit organisation. We're based in London, about 70 staff, and we're drawn from a variety of disciplines, from the social sector, from the finance, consulting, government. We also hold some specialists in data analytics and in performance management. And our mission is really to focus on evidence-based programs and seek to grow and develop them. And we recognise a series of stages, we like to think bottom-up, of which understand and design is very much an important part of getting our minds around a particular problem in its locality. Then there is the possibility of finance. How should that programme be funded? In no case do we always recommend social investment. In many cases it's not the right answer, and we're very happy to say that. We also do, however, get involved in the delivery of some of these programs. We act as a kind of what we call performance manager or managing agent to seek to optimize programs. And our hope is that a program that starts life as a pilot will foster a degree of comfort and will end up being purchased by mainstream organizations. So our starting point is that when we come into a situation, we've got a number of components, as you can see on the left of that slide, that in a sense need to be aligned or integrated. Government is clearly our primary partner. Governments are increasingly interested in best use of resources and value for money. There's a great deal of data. Data is sometimes held in different places. There's sometimes silos of data between governments that, as it were, doesn't talk to each other. We see very good locally based social organisations. We often refer to charities as social organisations, which know where need is and have some very innovative programmes, but don't necessarily have the finance tools to respond to these type of commissioning for outcomes. And then there are various forms of capital or finance. There's government, there is donor capital or grants, and there is social investment. And when it comes to grants, certainly in the UK context, is very interested to support social organisations directly, but is a bit more sensitive to being aligned with central government in central government programmes. So we see our role as being one of integrating and joining in an aligned way. We operate mostly in the UK across a number of social issue areas, and you mentioned some of those. We're also starting to operate internationally, where our partner is likely to be a big NGO like the World Bank or the UK government's International Development Division. And outside of the UK, some of the focus areas are large-scale health needs. For example, you can see there on the slides the reduction in sexual transmission in South Africa. We're looking at sleeping sickness eradication in Uganda, employment in Palestine, female maternal health in India. So a range of different issues, quite a diverse range, in fact. And globally, if you compare certainly where we were in a sense in 2007, and say how many pilots or programs can you say are being structured in this kind of way that involves some social investment. We've gone from maybe in 2007 a single pilot based in the UK around reducing reoffending at Peterborough Prison to today where I think we count over 50 projects globally which are using these type of techniques. And in the UK, for example, we've probably mobilised about £100 million of capital. So Bianca asked me when she was originally talking to me to try not to confuse you with language. So forgive me if I do 1 minute on some definitions. We sometimes refer to the commissioner. We simply mean the government, the contracting authority who is the budget holder and pays for a programme. So we sometimes refer to commissioning a programme. Some of you may have heard of a product called a social impact bond. It's a brand name. It relates to technically a form of project finance, but we see it as a partnership arrangement to service the needs of impact programmes which are being run on a pay-for-success basis. And I think it's also worth just noting that historically, maybe over the last 10 years, governments, not just in the UK but overseas, have changed the way that they think about the purchase of services. And they've gone from perhaps focusing on inputs, as you have here, paying for some staff days related to helping clients into employment, and then thinking more about paying for outputs, perhaps only paying for the completion of skills courses, and then more recently trying to design programs which focus more explicitly on outcomes, for example, a client actually getting a job. And again, in the US, you sometimes hear reference to pay for success. In the UK, it's payment by results or payment for outcomes. So I thought I would do really 3 things today, very briefly to talk about our theory of change at a very high level. Secondly, to to comment on when and why social investment may be appropriate. And then perhaps of more potential interest, look at three actual programs being run in the UK which have used these kinds of techniques. So our theory of change is that we've looked at a range of different partnerships, both in the work that we're doing in the UK and abroad. Our starting position is an assumption that not-for-profit or charitable organisations are very good partners. They're mission-driven, they are locally immersed in their areas, they have a very good knowledge of the needs of the client base. We think that programme designs should not just address client well-being and a sense of personal improvement, but should also have very clear and measurable outcomes, and that these can be tracked during the course of a programme, measured and, if appropriate, paid for in terms of how the programme is funded. And we think that social investment can help in a couple of areas. One where there are capacity building desires to build capacity of local social organisations that need some help to respond to these type of contracts. And a second area may be where there's some really promising innovations that could have positive shift, but where, for whatever reason, central government is not prepared to invest in these services, and where social investment can, in a sense, provide risk capital as a kind of learning pilot. So we talked a little bit about the component blocks of generating impact. And I suppose in terms of time, we'd love to be able to spend 3 to 6 months in the understand and design phases of getting to know about a problem in its specific geography and understanding the cohort. Some of these other phases can happen more quickly. Finance, for example, could actually be organised within a month. Delivery for us is about a programme that runs for, say, 3 to 5 years. If it's shorter than that, we don't see the potential for local stakeholders to invest in relationships, and we do think that those relationship building at local level is often a very big part of the ultimate success of programs. And then ultimately, we hope that these small pilots will generate a sense that this is a good thing, that it works, and it can be scaled and purchased and become part of mainstream provision, whether or not social investment plays any role in that. So in the first bit of this, the understand and design, we're paying particular attention to cohort overlaps. This slide shows some work that was done by Lankelly Chase, one of the larger charitable foundations in the UK, and it's looking at individuals or families and the overlap of need or disadvantage. So in the centre of that Venn diagram, you've got almost 60,000 individuals or families in the UK where you could identify homelessness, some offending behaviour, and some substance misuse as being particular issues or concerns. So again, our approach would be, if we were designing or thinking about a programme that responded to that group, we would try and make sure that the metrics and the success elements that drive the programme would respond to all three of those primary drivers. So why use social investment and when to use it? The context may be a little bit different here in Denmark. The UK experience is very severe budgetary constraint across central and local government, and this has now got to the stage where frontline services have been quite substantially cut actually compared to where they were. So there's a real focus on how resources are being used, and a real intent, it's partly politically driven, to focus on identifying the outcomes that programs are seeking to deliver and to designing the payment for those programs around these outcomes. So that's the context. And social organisations, often charities who operate at a local level, often have really good solutions. And as I said earlier, they're well embedded, they really know their clients, but they're not necessarily equipped to cope with the structure of the modern contracts. In some cases, they need help around data measurement and analytics. They almost certainly need working capital risk finance if the program is structured on a payment by results basis. And therefore, this category of finance that we call social investors provides, in effect, a flexible form of finance. It enables government to commission programs, purchase programs on a payment by results basis, using social sector organisations, but where the risk is effectively, the risk of success is transferred away from those smaller charities who are delivering the program to the social investors who initially fund it. And across the United Kingdom, I mentioned 50 or 60 globally, there are 32 social impact bond type pilots that you can identify across the UK over the last 6 or 7 years. Here you can see that they range in size from £1 million or so at the small end to £8 million or so. They're not very, very large projects by any means. They're running for anything between 3 and 5 or 6 years in duration. And they're covering a range of issues: adolescents at the edge of care, social isolation of the elderly, re-engagement of school-age children, reduction of homelessness. There's a range of issues in there. We have some involvement in 12 of the 32, which are the ones on that graph, and these are the ones which form part of the case studies that I was going to comment on. Just before I do, though, I wanted to say something about how programs are being funded. And initially, going back, say, to 2008-9, when this movement first took hold in the United Kingdom, there was a very traditional approach to programs showing additionality by reference to randomized control trials or control groups. And so the first program that was set up actually in a prison in Peterborough to seek to reduce reoffending used as its control group a group of offenders who would be drawn using propensity score matching on a coterminous basis. That means, hopefully, if that's clear. And so you were comparing the performance of the offenders in the pilot with the simultaneous experience of a larger group who formed the coterminous control group. So it's academically very rigorous. The results of that program are due actually later on this year. But the other side of that coin, in a sense, is it's quite a heavy-duty and reasonably costly way of providing evaluation. And so what we've seen more recently is the UK government moving towards applying values per outcome to programs. And this is something we refer to as a per capita tariff or a rate card approach. So obtaining a job might be worth a few £1,000s, moving somebody into accommodation might be worth a certain value. So this is a slightly more pragmatic approach maybe, but it's more efficient in terms of designing programs and enabling them to reach. So on this slide, apart from the single Peterborough pilot, all the rest actually have been funded using these rate cards. So three specific examples, and I've put them in this order: shared lives, IPS, and multi-systemic therapy, because they go from programs which are, if you like, very social in the way that the metrics have been designed, to a program which is a bit more financial in being designed around a more explicit cost avoidance or cost saving. The first, Shared Lives, is a program that seeks to help adults with learning difficulties or other needs and provides a home caring experience for them on a long-term basis. It's been running in the UK for a number of years. The second, Individual Placement and Support, is a branded intervention for individuals with mental health needs seeking employment. And the third, Multi-Systemic Therapy, is a high-fidelity US-initiated intervention to help adolescents who are at risk of being taken into care, we say being taken into state care, and to divert them. So these are the three. And the first of these is Shared Lives. Shared Lives is quite well established actually in the United Kingdom. There's about 12,000 individuals who are already part of the service. About half of those live with a carer in the home of the carer. The other half are perhaps visiting the carer, staying overnight occasionally, and this is a very long-term arrangement under which the carer receives a payment from the state and represents a very considerable value saving for the state compared to what would otherwise be more intensive residential care. It's a very high quality program, it's been well regarded, and the challenge was how to accelerate the rollout of this program and whether social investment could play a part. What social finance did was to raise a relatively small amount of capital, £1.5 million, from 4 investors, and sought to engage with some of the geographies within the UK who were interested in accelerating the expansion of shared lives. The specific structure is shown on this slide. So you have three parties, if you like. You have the contracting authority, which for the first 2 pilots was Manchester, which is a large metropolitan city with a reputation for innovation, and Lambeth, which is one of the London boroughs. So they decided that they wanted to see more shared lives provision in the locality. We had the Shared Lives Incubator, which is essentially a vehicle that social finance established, into which we put finance and some professional help and expertise. And we used that finance to establish new shared lives providers working in the locality, helping them to secure carers. And the arrangement was that as soon as these carers were established and individuals were introduced into care, then the contracting authorities would recognise that success by repaying the social investment. So this was a way, in effect, of finance helping to grow and stimulate a programme that was already successful, but perhaps not as widespread. Second pilot, I mentioned it, IPS, Individual Placement and Support. Again, this is quite a well-established intervention. I think there's been 15 randomised controlled trials between 1996 and 2011, specifically to help adults with mental health who are seeking employment. It's a voluntary programme, and the challenge here was to accelerate the rollout, if you like, of IPS in local settings. Again, we set up a vehicle, which in this case you can see in the middle of the slide, Health and Employment Partnerships, into which we put some finance raised from a funder called Big Issue Invest, you can see on the left. And we're working initially in 3 geographies. Two of them are London boroughs, the London borough of Haringey and of Tower Hamlets, and the third is a county council, Staffordshire. And the arrangement again is similar, that the funding pays for the provision locally of IPS to clients, and as those clients, and if those clients obtain jobs, which is the outcome success, then central government, in this case the Cabinet Office and our National Lottery, again you can see on the top right, will repay the investors on a success basis. Lastly, multi-systemic therapy, what we call the looked after children group, which is adolescents taken into care in the UK, is unfortunately a rising problem. Almost 70,000 children now taken into care, and it's 6% up since 2011. Once a child goes into care, they often stay there for 2 or 3 years. The cost of the system is very considerable. So whilst in many cases it's absolutely the right decision, there is a proportion of children who can, with intensive family help, be stabilised within their family environment. And this is what multi-systemic therapy does, which is a high-fidelity program. It's actually a licensed program from the US, and it works with very low caseloads. So again, the approach that was taken several years ago in the county of Essex was to launch a pilot using MST, which will work in total with 380 adolescents of that age group, 11 to 16. And we're slightly more than halfway through the pilot as we speak. And as you can see there, to date, of the entry group into the program, 80% have avoided being taken into care against a baseline expectation of 45%. So this is a pilot that's initially entirely funded with social investment. There's no state funding, but the County Council Essex agrees to pay on a success basis for those individuals who are avoided from getting into care, and our delivery partner is the charity Action for Children. So having seen that work in a UK context in this area, the challenge in a sense is scaling, and that's coming back finally to the title of this presentation. What is the potential to transform public service, and that is to some degree your ability to scale these programs. Firstly, to make sure people feel comfortable with them, but then to scale them. So here is an example of a recent discussion across 6 London boroughs. You can see listed on the left, Bexley, Hillingdon, etc. So 6 of the London boroughs. And we've been talking to them about their needs for this high-intensity provision. And we've have their agreement to make a joint purchasing vehicle. So in the middle you've got this thing called a Children's Services Platform, which is our name for the concept. And this platform will use a combination of evidence-based therapies, so MST, but also probably functional family therapy as well. We're looking at a cohort of maybe 450 adolescents over 3 or 4 years. And the proposal again is that it would be funded by social investment initially, with the boroughs paying on a success basis of effectively care days avoided. And in this case also our own national lottery fund will be topping up or increasing the outcomes on a success basis. So that's a quick canter through. That's my last slide. And a few examples from the UK. I'm sorry they're a bit UK-centric. And once again, thank you for the opportunity to join this discussion. Thank you very much.
There is an opportunity for a couple of quick questions. Yep. The National Board of Social Services has a question here.
Thank you. This was very interesting. It's more of a clarification point to your last slide here, that the pink arrows designate where there's outcome-linked payment, and what, like the arrow from the Children's Service Platform going back to the investors. Did I miss something in what you're told, or how is that? How does that work? They give money back to who? How?
So initially money comes from investors into the platform, and it pays for the delivery of the program. And the source of repayment for that money is the success of the program, and the principal success metric in this case is the avoidance of care days costs against a baseline. And the parties that effectively pay for that success are the 6 boroughs on the left, plus a top-up from our national lottery.
Okay, thank you.
Jonathan, you bring quite diverse partners together in those processes, and they, based on a very rough assumption, they would act upon very different logics. So speaking in cliches, you would deal with the soft social workers and the hardcore finance people, and then government, I don't know where they are, but there is potential for tension in those processes. So viewed from an implementation perspective, it can be quite tricky to establish those processes, I assume. Or is this a piece of cake?
I don't think it's a piece of cake. I think the challenges that you're trying to improve are in themselves quite complex and perhaps not fully understood. There is merit in a very disciplined approach to analysis of a problem. I think there's merit in being very clear about what you regard as success on the project, and in a sense where the value that's going into the project is is paying for success. But in some cases, we would do a piece of work, and we might even promote an evidence-based intervention, and then the government or the local authority would say, "That's great, thank you very much. We'll just buy it. We'll pay for it, because we're convinced it's the right answer." And that's great. You know, we're not here to necessarily insist on social investment playing a role. We're primarily interested in the promotion of evidence-based impact programs, and if necessary, using social investment as a kind of facilitator. But in no sense do we start from the perception that we're trying to force finance into areas where it's not actually useful.
And are there, if you were to point them out, and you don't need to be evidence-based here, but if you were to say, so there are 3 really important things to do when you do this kind of work, to bring people together in a shared agenda and share goals at the same time, what would these 3 things be?
Well, all life comes in threes, really. I think that the first thing is to socialise the problem in its geography. So really to try and pull together the academic research and the local experience. And what we find, maybe it's different in Denmark, that we find even within branches of local government, even within the same city, there are teams working quite closely together who don't talk very closely. And it's partly because life is busy and they don't necessarily have the time to focus in great depth on an issue. So I think that's really important. And I think flowing from that, I don't know if this will end up as being 2 or 3, but I think flowing from that, there's the analysis of where financial resources, i.e. budget, can be best spent. And then finally, the third thing to do is to create a partnership that is sufficiently transparent that it actually works as a partnership. It's got to endure for a number of years. It's got to have people in it who trust each other. And we very much favour data transparency, so that we like our programmes to be open to the partners, and they can see all aspects of them. So those are all, I think, elements of success.
Okay. Other questions, comments? Byron.
I'm curious about the outcomes and goals that they want to pay for, and wondering if there are ever cases in which you worry about sort of perverse incentives. So if we pay for clinical outcomes, might we start searching for a certain type of client, for instance, that would allow us to deliver those outcomes? And so I've heard some discussion that maybe we should be paying for fidelity to evidence-based treatments rather than sort of the outcome of the evidence-based treatments for that reason. Just this sort of a broad question, but any sort of thoughts on how you consider what outcomes you ultimately choose to invest in?
So I'd love to think we could design programs that didn't have any perverse outcomes, and I'm sure we haven't been successful, but one of the ways we try and avoid that is that we're very clear on eligibility up front, and we don't control referrals. So the referral decision into our program comes from the local municipality or comes from local government, and is set within an eligibility. So the cohort complexity, if you like, is something that we try and design and specify, but we don't then control it.
All right. Thank you so much. Please join me in giving a hand, and thank you.
Thank you.
Er det generalforsamlingen? Ja. Okay. Nu skifter jeg over til dansk. Den her årskonference er forbi, og der er ikke store ord, jeg har til sidst, udover at nu her, kl. 16.45, så begynder der en generalforsamling i Dansk Implementeringsnetværk. Og hvis I er medlem, så er I velkommen til at blive og afgive stemmer. Hvis I ikke er medlem, så er I velkommen til at blive og kigge og lytte og tænke over, om denne her forening kunne være noget for jer at engagere jer i. Så mange tak for at have deltaget i den her dag. Mange tak for aktiv deltagelse i workshops, og vi håber, at den har givet jer et eller andet, hvad det nu end kan være. Evidensen for, at det virkelig gør en forskel, er meget lille. Men så har I hvert fald haft en god dag ud af det her. Kom godt hjem. Lad være med at være irriteret på DSB. Det skal nok gå. Og så ses vi igen til næste år. Tak for det.